Hello and welcome to Audiobook Reviews. In this video, I'll be discussing Sourcery by Terry Pratchett, a Discworld novel. Now, I do have to right off the bat mention that this gets points already for having a literal pun be the title and general plot device of the book, with sorcery being sorcerer being a source of magic instead of just a normal wizard who uses magic. And B, I'll note that you have probably noticed the interesting cover because the copy I have is an older UK only printing that I somehow found in a used bookstore, and it's actually the only one I have that's not of the new, more minimalist covers, and it's just so zany and interesting right off the bat. It definitely fits the content of a Pratchett novel. Now, Sourcery is another Rincewind and or the Luggage novel, and those, if you watch my other videos, were not quite my favorite. Didn't care for Color Magic. Light Fantastic I thought was a bit better. This book definitely jumped up and I think told a much better story and had a lot of humor. It did still feel a little repetitive in parts, though, I do want to mention. It's another thing involving the wizards where the world's going to end and somehow Rincewind has to help stop it from happening, and feels a little bit familiar in that way. But the humor, very, very top notch, and some of the things that were done and the different levels of parody were particularly great. So the base plot here, we see that we've learned in other books anyway, that the eighth son of an eighth son is of course going to be a wizard, but if you're the eighth son of the eighth son, then you'd be a wizard squared, which means you're a sorcerer. Apparently, we learn this is actually why wizards are generally supposed to be celibate, so that we do not have any sorcerers appearing in Discworld, because they are sources of magic. It's too much, and the world can't handle that much magic. So basically, we see a young boy born as a sorcerer. The wizard who had fathered him basically takes over as his staff so that death can't take him, and is controlling him so that through his son they can take over the entire world and have wizards in charge of everything, because he doesn't like the fact that the wizards are a little bit bumbling, kind of just stay usually in their university and don't do a whole lot. So we start with that kind of look there. A lot of really fun jokes I thought were brought in with the whole war between the wizards and between wizardry and sorcery. The main entity, I guess I'll say, anthropomorphic personification, that is going against the sorcerer, is the Arch-Chancellor's hat. And it's the hat itself. There's no Arch-Chancellor. The Arch-Chancellor was going to be crowned and then was killed as a part of this. And so it's actually the hat. Apparently has enough magic. And so you have that fighting. But we learn the way that wizards fight is by building a tower and fighting from there. And just kind of a fun poke that you do have so many stories where it's the trope, the wizard. There's just one, it's in a tower, and so that's apparently what happens. When there's too much magic, wizards fight, they build towers until there's only one left. Kind of just doing what Pratchett likes to do, explaining tropes in an interesting way. But we have that going on in general. Rincewind, of course, gets roped into it by the hat. We meet Konina, who is the daughter of Cohen the Barbarian. She really just wants to be a hairdresser, but all her instincts are barbarian. And later we do have Nigel, who is the son of a merchant but wants to be a barbarian and is reading the instruction manual allegedly written by Cohen the Barbarian on how to become a barbarian. So definitely a lot of fun there. They do travel to another place, and we have kind of a general Aladdin parody going on as well. Everything from the kind of Sultan character to the magic lamp and magic carpet. We get to see some fun poked at those as well. Now, I do want to really quickly do what's my tradition with Discworld novels, and with absolutely no context, read some of my favorite lines out of the books. There will not be spoilers here. I'm not giving context. These are just generally very amusing, at least to me, lines. Starting with, "This is a building, you see," said the bursar. Like most wizards, when faced with a puzzle, he started to roll himself a cigarette. "It's not a ship. There are ways of telling, you know." absence of porpoises frolicking around the bows, a shortage of bilges, that sort of thing. The chances of foundering are remote. Next up we have, but she's a, Rincewind hesitated. She's of the female persuasion, he muttered. So was your mother. Yes, well, but she ran away before I was born, Rincewind mumbled. And finally we have you ever been bitten by a viper? No. In that case, you'll understand exactly what it felt like. Hmm? It wasn't like a snake bite at all. So those are some of my favorite passages. A few other things I do want to point out that were just extra comical in this. And one thing I have been a little bit critical of Pratchett is that some of the books are just complete absurdity. A lot of jokes, very humorous, but not a lot really going on with the general kind of plot, not a huge narrative a lot of time. There literally is a line in this book where a character says, there's more to life than narrative, you know, which I felt like was extremely tongue-in-cheek just because I'm sure at the time these books were being written, there was similar feedback that while they are brilliantly written, it's great absurdist fantasy, you do get to a point where you want a little bit more than just the jokes. And he has other stories I've read so far that have really good plot. This was a little bit better. It was a little bit more. It's a Rincewind story, so I feel like it's going to be a bit zanier, but there was a bit more going on as well. And having that line, I still thought was very funny. And then there's also a particular scene where characters are essentially traveling in a physics defying way. And the explanation given is that it's actually possible if you do it quietly and quickly enough before the laws of physics notice and correct themselves. And so you have that happening. And whenever a character mentions it doesn't seem possible, I feel, no, don't think about it. Don't talk about it. Or the laws of physics will catch up and notice. So that was the last kind of just really fun section, I thought. It was overall an enjoyable book. I did like it. It's still not quite at the top for me with Pratchett. A couple of the other books I definitely liked. They had a bit more plot and still a lot of good parody. But this book, at least for the Rincewind arc, went at least a little bit closer toward more of a parody with a narrative versus just absurd chaos going on as well. Um, I will actually, I usually try to avoid spoilers with these videos for Discworld, but I am going to really briefly talk about one big spoiler because it's pretty important and should be interesting to find out what happens next. So at this point, if you do want to skip the spoiler, check the description down below and there'll be a timestamp where you can skip forward here too to get to the end of the video and the summary. With that though, I am going to get into it. So the big spoiler basically here is that Rincewind is left in the dungeon dimension at the end of this book. And we don't actually know what happens. Now, I imagine in the next Rincewind novel, I don't know how many more there are. I'm pretty sure there are somewhere at least. We are going to find out. But it was an interesting way to end the book and did speak a little bit more toward there being an overall plot, which is something I liked as well. Instead of just the oh, and we solved that everything's fine, which this book still kind of does. It was kind of the ending for Color Magic and for Light Fantastic as well, where everything just sort of works out and everything's fixed. We do get to see Rincewind actually trying, and he really doesn't want the adventure. He doesn't, want to be a hero, but realizes he's got to. He tries. He makes an attempt. He actually saves the young boy who was the sorcerer, helps him defeat his father by throwing away the staff and right things in the world, but is left behind. And once again, an interesting way to end and does make me curious to continue reading the Discworld series as well, which I do intend to do. So overall, Sourcery, I would say definitely my favorite of the Rincewind novels so far. Set up what should be interesting for the continuing books as well, and really just had some fantastic humor as always, which you're gonna get with Pratchett. I think generally no matter what you do, read. So I will be continuing as well. I have a couple more Discworld novels that I already own that I will most certainly be reading, and then I will have to slowly keep collecting from there. There are, of course, a ton of them, but let me know your thoughts on this book. If you agree with my thoughts, maybe you have completely different opinions on Rincewind, but for me, this one did go a bit more in the right direction. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a like, and if you want to see more content like this, then feel free to subscribe.